Amidst the sun-scorched sands of the Utah desert stands a solitary stone, blackened by time and covered in strange symbols, which even today, the local inhabitants avoid. Legends abound about this place, whispering of eerie sounds emanating from beneath the earth on moonless nights. In 1902, a group of researchers discovered something here that forever altered their perception of the boundary between science and the occult. Beneath a layer of sand and stones, they found a wooden box with exquisite carvings. Inside lay a marionette of incredible detail, with eyes made of real glass that seemed to follow every movement of the observer. Alongside it were human bones and a diary whose pages revealed one of the darkest stories of the American frontier. This channel is not for everyone, but if you stay with us, we will uncover the mystery of the marionette named Galileo and those who perished by its hand in 1801. In the early 19th century, the territory of modern-day Utah was practically unexplored by European settlers. The harsh climate and isolation made this region an ideal refuge for those seeking solitude from civilization and its laws. It was here, in 1800, that a small group of missionaries established a temporary camp, intended as the first step toward creating a permanent settlement. The group was led by Reverend Joseph Hightower, a man with an impeccable reputation in Boston's religious circles, but with a past full of mysteries and contradictions. According to official records found in the archives of a Boston church, Hightower received blessing and funding for his mission after presenting a detailed plan to convert the indigenous population to Christianity. However, letters discovered in his personal trunk many years later paint a very different picture. In one of them, dated January 15, 1800, Hightower wrote to his longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Simon Blackwood, "We have finally found a place remote enough from prying eyes to continue our research. Here, under the guise of a pious mission, we can freely test theories that the Academy so hastily dismissed as heresy." What kind of research was the Reverend planning under the cloak of religious activity? To answer this question, we need to go back a few years to 1797, when Hightower and Blackwood were members of a secret scientific society in Boston. According to the meeting minutes, which are kept in the Harvard Library, both were expelled from the society for experiments that contradicted the laws of nature and divine order. The specific details of these experiments were erased from official documents, but in Dr. Blackwood's personal diary, discovered by his great-grandson in the 1950s, there is mention of attempts to breathe life into inanimate matter through a combination of electrical impulses and ancient rituals. The journey to Utah was long and dangerous. Hightower's group consisted of 17 people. The Reverend himself, Dr. Blackwood, 3 other men with academic backgrounds whose names appear only as initials in the surviving documents, and 10 assistants recruited from the poor districts of Boston. In the diary of Sarah Johnson, a young woman hired as a kitchen assistant, there is a description of the first days of the journey. The Reverend and the doctor often seclude themselves in their tent, from which strange sounds and light emanate, as if from many candles. No one dares to disturb them, and Thomas, who once tried to eavesdrop on their conversation, was sent back to Boston the very next day. By the end of the summer of 1800, the group reached a place that Hightower declared ideal for their mission. A rocky plain surrounded by low hills provided some protection from the winds and a good view of the surrounding area. There was a small spring nearby which solved the problem of water. The first weeks were devoted to building temporary dwellings and preparing for the coming winter. But even then, the local inhabitants noticed strange things about the behavior of their new neighbors. The chief of the Ute tribe, whose territory was a few days' journey from the missionary camp, sent a delegation to establish contact. In oral traditions recorded by ethnographers in the early 20th century, the story of the first meeting has been preserved. The white people built dwellings unlike the dwellings of other white people. In the center of their camp stood a large structure without windows, surrounded by strange signs on the earth. When our people approached, a man in black robes came out to meet them and spoke words of friendship, but his eyes were as cold as a snake's before it strikes. Our shaman felt a dark energy emanating from this place and said that the spirits of the earth were restless. What was happening behind the closed doors of the central structure, which in Hightower's official reports was listed as a church and school for converts? Part of the answer can be found in the notes of Dr. Blackwood, which he kept in a special coded journal. This journal was deciphered only in the 1970s with the help of early computers. According to these records, as early as September of 1800, the scientists began their main experiment, creating an automaton that could operate independently of human control. September 17th, 1800. Today, we finally began constructing the subject. Jay suggested using wood instead of metal, citing ancient texts that mention living statues made of wood. I am skeptical of this decision, but his arguments about the greater susceptibility of organic material to ethereal energies have a certain logic. We started by creating a basic structure modeled after a marionette, but with a much more complex internal mechanism. From other records, it becomes clear that the subject was a complex marionette, the size of a 10-year-old child. Its design combined elements of traditional wooden dolls with mechanisms inspired by the works of European watchmakers. But the most unusual aspect of the creation was the integration of alchemical and occult elements into the production process. October 5th, 1800. We have completed the basic construction. Jay insisted on using wood from an old gallows for the main joints and a fragment of bone from a Native American burial site for the head mechanism. I still doubt the necessity of such materials, but his knowledge of ancient texts surpasses mine. Tomorrow we will begin the activation process. The activation process, as Blackwood called it, was far removed from traditional science of the time. His notes describe rituals performed during the full moon, the use of strange herbs and minerals, and, most disturbingly, the application of animal blood to sanctify the marionette's mechanisms. All this took place under the guidance of Hightower, who, judging by all accounts, possessed extensive knowledge of occult practices hidden beneath the mask of religious zeal. By December of 1800, the marionette, named Galileo after the Italian scientist, was ready. In Blackwood's journal, there is an entry from December 21st, winter solstice. We conducted the final activation ritual. The results exceeded all expectations. G demonstrated signs of autonomous movement just an hour after the ceremony's completion. J is ecstatic, although I notice signs of exhaustion after the ritual. Something in G's movements worries me, as if it possesses not just mechanical, but some other form of life. Before we continue this alarming tale, consider for a moment from which state you are listening to this story. Perhaps not far from you, there are also secrets waiting to be uncovered. The winter of 1800 and 1801 was particularly harsh in the Utah desert. Isolated from the outside world by snowdrifts, the inhabitants of the missionary camp were forced to spend most of their time in their huts. The only exception was the church, where Hightower, Blackwood, and their colleagues continued their experiments with Galileo. According to Sarah Johnson's diary, the atmosphere in the camp was becoming increasingly tense. January 10th, 1801. Today I heard strange sounds from the church again, unlike any human voice, more like the creaking of wood on wood, but with a rhythm, almost like speech. Mr. Foster said he saw the Reverend carrying some kind of bundle wrapped in fabric from the church to his hut late at night. The bundle was the size of a child, but it moved strangely, jerkily. No one dares to ask questions. At the same time, the first inexplicable events began to occur. In Blackwood's records, there are mentions of missing tools and strange noises at night. But the most alarming evidence relates to the end of January, 1801, when one of the assistants, a young man named James Wilson, disappeared. January 30th, 1801. G did not return from his patrol of the camp perimeter. We organized a search, but to no avail. J seems unusually calm and stated that the young man probably deserted, although in this weather, it is tantamount to suicide. G is showing increasing activity, especially at night. Sometimes it seems to me that he is watching me when he thinks I don't notice. A week after Wilson's disappearance, Blackwood made another disturbing entry. I discovered strange tracks around Jay's hut, like the footprints of small feet, but with unnaturally deep indentations, as if left by something very heavy for its size. The tracks led to the church and back. When I mentioned this to Jay, he became aggressive and forbade me from approaching his dwelling without an invitation. The first confirmed victim appeared in February 1801. Thomas Brown, one of the academics whose full name was never established, was found dead in his hut. The official version recorded in Hightower's report stated that the man had succumbed to heart disease. However, in Blackwood's personal notes, there is a completely different description. TB found in his bed, face distorted by horror. On his neck, strange marks resembling finger marks, but too small for an adult. J forbade me from performing an autopsy and insisted on immediate burial. Something is changing in him. He spends more and more time with G, talking to him as if he were alive. As spring approached, tension in the camp grew. Sarah Johnson wrote of strange conversations and whispers in the corners, of how Reverend Hightower less frequently conducted services, preferring to seclude himself in the church or his hut. In March, another person disappeared, Maria Clark, a kitchen assistant. This time, the search was more thorough, and fragments of her clothing were found several hundred meters from the camp. But her body was not found. By April 1801, Dr. Blackwood, judging by his notes, began to seriously fear for his safety and the safety of the remaining members of the expedition. April 12, 1801. I can no longer ignore the obvious. G has gained some form of consciousness, but it is not what we had hoped for. There is malice in its movements. In its dead glass eyes, I see an inhuman intelligence. J is completely under its influence, says that G speaks to him, promises knowledge beyond human understanding. I tried to convince him to destroy the marionette, but he threatened me with death if I approached it. At the end of April, an incident occurred that finally convinced Blackwood of the need to act. One of the assistants, a 50-year-old George Harris, burst into the doctor's hut in the middle of the night. His clothes were torn, and deep cuts were visible on his hands. "He's here, doctor, he's everywhere," Harris muttered. "The little wooden boy with the devil's eyes. The Reverend gave him a knife, and he chased me all over the camp." By morning, Harris had fallen into a feverish delirium, and by evening, he died. Hightower insisted on a diagnosis of fever-induced delirium and again ordered the body to be buried immediately. After this incident, Blackwood began secretly preparing to escape. In his notes, there are mentions of gathering supplies and trying to determine the safest route. He also tried to convince Sarah Johnson and several other assistants to join him. May 3rd, 1801, S has agreed to run away with me. She too has seen G wandering around the camp at night and fears for her life. We plan to leave in 3 days, when J goes to meet with the Indians. I hope we can reach the nearest settlement before he discovers our absence. However, the escape did not take place. The last entry in Blackwood's journal is dated May 5th, 1701. J knows everything. I don't know how, but he discovered our plans. S disappeared this morning. I am locked in my hut. I hear footsteps outside, too light for an adult. G is watching me through a crack in the wall. His glass eyes gleam in the darkness. J said that tonight I will become part of a great experiment, that my life force will help G become even stronger. If someone finds these records, know that we have created something that should never have existed, and I fear that now it cannot be stopped. Before we move on to what happened next in this dark story, leave a comment with your theory about what Galileo actually was. Was it simply a mechanical marionette possessed by some supernatural being, or something more? The fate of the missionary camp would have been forever lost to history if not for the accidental discovery made in 1902. A group of geologists, exploring potential mineral deposits in the Utah desert, came across the remains of structures almost completely hidden by sand and time. Initial excavations revealed the foundations of several huts and a larger building in the center, corresponding to the description of the church from Hightower's records. But the most important find was made under the floor of this central structure, in a specially equipped room accessed through a hidden hatch. Archaeologists discovered a wooden chest with carefully arranged papers and books. Among them were the personal diaries of Reverend Hightower, covering the period from May 1801 to February 1802, as well as several ancient volumes in Latin and Hebrew, dedicated to occult practices. But the most disturbing find was a wooden box decorated with strange symbols. Inside it lay a marionette of exquisite workmanship, with a face expressing almost human intelligence. Hightower's records, after the disappearance of Dr. Blackwood, reveal the horrifying truth about what was happening in the isolated camp. Gradually, the Reverend completely abandoned his religious mask, fully devoting himself to developing Galileo's abilities. In an entry from May 10, 1801, he writes, "Tonight, our little friend exceeded all expectations. Blackwood's energy proved extremely nourishing. G can now move completely autonomously for several hours without needing to recharge. Moreover, he has begun to show the beginnings of speech, although so far, it sounds more like a whisper than real words. Tomorrow, I will prepare the next subject for the experiment." The records for the following weeks detail a series of rituals that Hightower conducted with Galileo. These rituals became increasingly complex and required more and more material, as the Reverend euphemistically called his victims. By the end of June, according to the records, there were only 4 people left in the camp: Hightower himself, 2 of his devoted assistants, and the last victim, whose name is not mentioned. June 30th, 1801. Today, we will conduct the final ritual of G's transfiguration. He is ready to move to the next level of existence. After so many years of studying ancient texts, after so many failed experiments, we are finally standing on the threshold of the greatest discovery in human history: the creation of true artificial life, not limited by the laws of nature. G has promised me knowledge and power beyond human comprehension once the transformation is complete. What happened on the night of July 1st, 1801, remains a matter of debate among researchers of this case. Hightower's records become rambling and incoherent, interspersed with strange symbols and drawings. From what can be made out, the transfiguration ritual did not go as planned. He has changed, but not as he should have. His eyes are now alive, but there is nothing human in them. A voice sounds from his wooden mouth, but it is not the voice I expected to hear. He speaks of worlds beyond, of stars, of beings older than time itself. My assistants fled in terror, but they will not escape. I remain because I have no choice. He will not let me go. Subsequent entries become increasingly disjointed, with large gaps in time. In them, Hightower describes how Galileo gradually takes control of the camp, how the marionette demands new victims, whom the Reverend has to seek among passing travelers and Indians. There is mention of strange changes in Galileo's physical appearance. His wooden skin is now warm to the touch. Sometimes it seems to me that it pulsates like living flesh. The joints move more and more smoothly, without mechanical creaking. Yesterday, I noticed that his right hand had lengthened by several inches. His fingers have become thinner and sharpened like claws. The last entry in Hightower's diary is dated February 15th, 1802. He said that I am no longer needed, that I have fulfilled my function. I begged him for mercy, reminded him of all the sacrifices I had made for him. He only laughed, that terrible, grating laugh that chills the blood in your veins. Tonight, he will complete his transformation, and for that, he needs my life force. I am locking myself in this room, hiding the diaries and instruments. Maybe someday someone will find them and understand what a terrible mistake I made. I hear his footsteps in the corridor, wooden feet tapping on the floor. The door will not hold for long. On this, Hightower's records break off. What happened next can only be guessed. Archaeological excavations in 1902 discovered human remains under the floor of the secret room, presumably belonging to the Reverend. Oddities in the condition of the remains were noted in the expedition report. The skeleton is well preserved, but demonstrates anomalies that are difficult to explain by natural causes. The bones of the skull have many small cracks radiating from central points, as if under the influence of strong pressure from within. The rib cage is completely destroyed. The ribs are bent outward. On the surface of some bones, strange grooves resembling the traces of small but very sharp tools were found. The marionette found in the box was initially perceived as simply a unique artifact demonstrating the high skill of an unknown creator. It was transferred to the State Museum, where it was exhibited as an example of early American wood carving. However, strange events began to occur almost immediately. Curators reported that the exhibit changed position overnight, despite the fact that the exhibition hall was locked. Several visitors claimed to have seen the marionette's glass eyes follow them, and one security guard even filed an official report that he had heard whispers coming from the display case late at night. In 1908, an unexplained fire broke out in the museum, destroying most of the collection. When firefighters were able to enter the building, they discovered that the fire had started in the very hall where Galileo was exhibited. The marionette disappeared, and its whereabouts remain unknown to this day. The story has left behind more questions than answers. What did Hightower and Blackwood actually create in their isolated camp? Was the marionette simply a vessel for some ancient entity, or did they truly manage to create a new form of life by combining science with the occult? And the most disturbing question, where is Galileo now, if it has indeed gained the ability to autonomous existence? Research conducted in recent decades has revealed several interesting facts that may shed light on this enigmatic story. Firstly, analysis of the preserved pages from the books found in Hightower's cache showed that many of them belong to very rare and forbidden literature. One of the volumes was identified as a copy of Beruvium, the Book of the Living Tree, a 15th century grimoire that was thought to be completely lost. This book contains rituals for animating inanimate objects and creating golems, but with an emphasis on the use of wood instead of traditional clay. Secondly, chemical analysis of wood samples from which the box for the marionette was made revealed an unusual composition. The wood contained abnormally high concentrations of iron and other metals, which are not usually found in wood in such quantities. Moreover, the structure of the fibers showed strange changes, similar to those that occur under the influence of strong electric fields. Finally, there is evidence that Galileo's story did not end with the fire in the museum. Throughout the 20th century, there were several cases when strange wooden figurines resembling miniature copies of the marionette from Hightower's records were found in different parts of the United States. These figurines were usually found near places of unexplained incidents. Disappearances of people, strange deaths, unexplained fires. In 1967, anthropologist Robert Murray, studying the oral traditions of the Ute tribes, recorded a legend about a wooden man who steals souls. According to this legend, a creature made of wood by white people wanders the desert in search of victims. It can change its size and shape, but always retains glass eyes that reflect the emptiness between the stars. Local residents believe that the creature feeds on the life force of its victims to sustain its own existence. In 1995, a private collector from Nevada claimed to have acquired at auction a marionette that could be the original Galileo. He planned to show it to experts and historians, but the day before the scheduled meeting, a fire broke out in his house, in which the collector himself died, and most of his collection was destroyed. The marionette, as in the case of the museum, disappeared without a trace. Today, the story of Galileo remains one of the most enigmatic pages in the history of the American frontier. For some, it is simply a dark tale born of the isolation and harsh living conditions of the first settlers. For others, it is evidence of dangerous experiments on the border of science and the occult. And for some, it is a warning that there are knowledge and forces that humanity is better off not disturbing. The authentic diaries of Hightower and Blackwood are stored in a special vault at the Smithsonian Institution, access to which is strictly limited. The marionette, if it still exists, has never appeared publicly again. But sometimes, especially in remote areas of the Utah desert, travelers tell of strange sounds in the night, like wooden steps, and the feeling that someone is watching them from the darkness, with glassy, unblinking eyes. Perhaps somewhere there, among the sands and stones, Galileo is still wandering in search of new victims, new sources of energy to maintain its unnatural existence. And perhaps it is still waiting for the moment when it can complete the transformation that it began so long ago with Reverend Hightower. And now that you know this story, be careful. If you ever find yourself in the desert areas of Utah, and if you hear light wooden steps behind you or notice movement out of the corner of your eye, do not turn around, because Galileo, the forbidden marionette that should never have existed, may still be looking for those who can help it find its final, true life.